Morning dear students, welcome back to yet another session of English class. Today's class will be a revision class, as you can see it written on the board. As all of you know very well, we had been discussing several chapters. We had been discussing about a letter to God, Lencho being the main character. Then we also had a look into the life of Nelson Mandela, his political life, his contribution to the country of South Africa. And then we also discussed two poems, Dust of Snow, Fire and Ice. So it is better that we recollect or reflect over whatever we have studied so far, so that we can check ourselves whether what we have studied is there with us or not, or have we been able to retain what we have studied or not. So that is why this revision class is, and we begin with a revision of the first lesson, that is a letter to God. So as you know, we had discussed the central character of this lesson, that is Lencho. Lencho was a poor farmer who raised a crop of corn in his field, and unfortunately the field gets destroyed because of a hailstorm. And then we see the reaction of Lencho to what happened. And because of the loss of the crop, he writes a letter to God. And you also know his demand of the letter. So the main questions or the main points that we need to discuss in this lesson is, Lencho was a man of God. So the writer wants to tell us that he believed in God. So how do we know that he was a man of God? How do we know that he had a firm belief in God? There are sentences in the lesson to prove that. And one of the sentences, remember, no one dies of hunger. And who said this? Definitely Lencho. And when did Lencho say these words? When the crop was completely destroyed by a severe hailstorm, there was nothing to eat in the family, and everybody was sad, they were upset, downcast, hopeless, frustrated. It was at that particular moment, Lencho comes out with this sentence, remember, no one dies of hunger. Which means God does not allow anybody to die of hunger because we are God's creations. So if God has created us, He will definitely feed us. He will not let us die of hunger. That was the belief of Lencho. So this one sentence tells us that Lencho believed in God. He was a man who was very, very spiritual. So that exactly is the sentence. And the next one is, God, if you don't help me, I and my family will die. If you read the lines of the lesson, if you read the entire lesson, you will come across this. The moment Lencho feels that the crop has been destroyed by the hailstorm and they had no food to eat, Lencho makes a strong supplication to God. What is the meaning of supplication? He makes a kind of prayer to God, and he pleads to God and requests God to help him. And he says, God, I believe in you. And if you don't help me, I and my family will definitely die, and that would be the end of our lives. So, he does not turn to any man. There might have been many friends of Lencho, but he did not turn to anyone for help. But he straight away told God. It's a direct address to God, saying that if God did not help him, his family would die. So by this sentence, he wants to say that God has to come down and help him by all means. There isn't any other source of help for him except God. So the third point is, the most important point, he writes a letter to God. Now this seems to be a bit queer. What is the meaning of queer? It seems to be a bit strange. How can a man write a letter to God? We can write letter to our friends. We can write letter to our relatives. We can write letter to our parents or some officials. Well, that is okay, acceptable. That is how the world is. That's how we go about. But here we find a man writing a letter directly to God. Did he ever think that God will get the letter? But his action tells us only one thing, that is, he had immense faith in God, unshakable faith in God, strong faith in God. He was rooted in faith. His faith was rooted in God. That is why he writes a letter directly to God, saying, God, Now, I have come to the end of the road, which means it's all done or it's all over with me. My crop has been destroyed. There is nothing to eat for us in the family. And if you don't send me 100 pesos, I will not be able to raise another crop, or I will not be able to cultivate. Therefore, my life and the life of my family members is in your hands. Therefore, kindly send me 100 pesos. So you see, he's asking, he's making a direct appeal to God. His faith is rooted only in God and not on human beings. So this letter is important. What was the content of Lencho's letter? Questions might be asked. The content was nothing but Lencho asking God to send him 100 pesos so that he can raise a crop or cultivate corn again in his field. And you see, after writing the letter, he sealed it in an envelope. He sealed the letter in an envelope and he directly wrote the address on that, and the address was to God. Normally when we write the sentence address on the envelope, don't we? And here Lencho writes a letter to God, and after writing the letter, he seals it in an envelope, and on top of the envelope he writes to God. This is a clear proof that Lencho was a man of God. He had strong faith, an unshakable faith in God. And after that, he goes to the post office the next Sunday, and you know what happened? There was a big envelope, and he opened the envelope and he saw something, and after seeing the 70 pesos, again he makes an appeal to God, and the appeal is, God, send me the remaining 30 pesos. I had asked for 100 pesos, but you have sent only 70. What about the remaining 30? So send the remaining 30 pesos, and not only that, when you send it the next time, don't send it to the post office people, because they are a bunch of crooks. They cheat. So send the 30 pesos, the remaining 30 pesos, directly to me. So this sums up the faith that Lencho had in God. He's asking God for everything. He's dependent on God for everything. So these are some of the sentences to prove that Lencho was a man who had an unshakable faith in God. Then we come to another part of the lesson. This is also an important part of the lesson. The role of the postmaster in the letter. The role of the postmaster in the story. What did the postmaster say? What did he do? He saw the letter of Lencho, and he was impressed by the style of his writing, and he was impressed by the faith that Lencho had in God, and being impressed by the faith that he had in God, the postmaster himself tries to help him. You see, God does not come directly and help us. God helps us in times of trouble, but how? Through some people. And here it is a postmaster whom God chose. So postmaster was an instrument chosen by God, and he sent him 70 pesos. And how did he send it? He did not send it all by himself. What was his effort? He collected the money from his employees. The postmaster himself contributed some money, and he inspired the employees, requested the employees so that they may give their bit or they may do their mite, and everybody contributed, and the total amount came up to 70 pesos. And the postmaster stands as a symbol of humanness. He stands as a symbol of humanity. You see, God works through men, but men who have humanness, they alone can help people. So here the postmaster is a symbol of humanness because he took the initiative. And his role is very, very important. A question might be asked in this, right? So far so good. Now we come to the next part of it, the last part, the conflict. There is a conflict. You know the conflict? You know the meaning of that? A sort of disorder. What is a disorder? What is a conflict? There are two kinds of conflicts. The first conflict is that the postmaster helps Lencho. He tells his employees to contribute. He also contributes from his side, and finally he collects 70 pesos and helps Lencho. But you see, Lencho does not believe the postmaster. He doesn't know the story. He directly blamed the postmaster. Though the postmaster was the instrument of God who helped Lencho with 70 pesos, Lencho refused to understand the truth and he called him a thief. And he not only called the postmaster as a thief, but he also called the people who were working in the post office, the employees, as a bunch of crooks. So you see, this is the irony in the story. The man who helps Lencho becomes the culprit. The man who helps Lencho becomes a thief. The people who helped him, they become thieves. So that exactly is the irony, and that is a conflict. The man who helped Lencho becomes a man of suspicion. So there is a conflict between Lencho and the postmaster and his men. The second part is the conflict between nature and human beings. So the first part is conflict between human beings themselves. One human being and another human being. There is a conflict. In the second part, there is a conflict between human beings and nature. What is a conflict? You see? Lencho, he tried his best to raise the crop. He tended the crops. He worked in the field. The writer says he was an ox of a man. Lencho was an ox of a man, a very hard-working fellow. But what happened? In a fraction of a second, all his crops, they were destroyed because a sudden hailstorm came and the crops were razed to the ground. So you see conflict between human beings and nature. When nature plays a dangerous game, when nature causes havoc, when nature causes destruction, that becomes a conflict. So here in this lesson we see nature and human being. There is a conflict between the two of them. So this is another important point. And some of the important questions that you may pay attention to are the content of Lencho's letter. What did he write in his first letter? Then the response of Lencho. How did Lencho respond to the help of the postmaster? What did he say when he found the 70 pesos in the envelope? So these parts need to be focused on because questions are often asked on this. And then the grammar portion related to this lesson is connectors. We will discuss connectors in a separate class. But remember the relative pronouns who, whose. These are some of the most important relative pronouns with which we connect sentences. For example, Raju, I'll just give an example orally. Raju is my friend. His father works in a bank. Let us take the sentence. Raju is my friend. His father works in a bank. Two sentences. This is the first sentence and this is the second one. Now, how I am going to connect these two sentences? We can connect these two sentences with whose. So, if you connect it with whose, the answer that you get is Raju, whose father works in a bank, is my friend. Raju, whose father works in a bank. Raju is the main subject. It's the subject of the sentence. Whose father works in a bank, that gives an extra information. So the connector whose, or the relative pronoun whose, is used to connect both the sentences and make them into one. So the answer would be Raju, whose father works in a bank, is my friend. And there are some other relative pronouns as well with which we can connect sentences. We shall discuss that in the forthcoming class. Till then, stay safe and goodbye.